Well, thank you. Thank you very, very much. Welcome to Broadway Buzz. My name is Joe Gary, and I am absolutely delighted to welcome you to Dirty Dancing. You know, there's an incredible story about this legacy. I mean, keep in mind, a young woman, Eleanor Bergstein, in the 1960s, in 1963 to be exact, would travel with her family to Grossinger's, a resort in the Catskills. She came from a sort of upper middle class Jewish family. Her father was a doctor. Her older sister was interested in interior design, and they would spend the summer at Grossinger's, this wonderful resort, a family resort. Fathers would very often go into town and work during the week to support the family's luxurious stay there, and everyone would be entertained, 18 hours a day. There were dance classes, there were acting classes, there were crocheting classes, you name it, there it was. And Grossinger's was the place to be. So as a young girl, the author of this story really was called Baby. And in real life, in 1963, just before the summer before she went off to college, she wanted to join the Peace Corps. She was hoping one day to find a husband as wonderful as her father. Do you remember when people were like this? God, it's, and in any case, it was really sort of her story. And when she was a young girl and when she would go to Grossinger's, she was called the Mambo Queen because she loved to dance. And in that period, of course, young kids had what was called dirty dancing. I mean, at Grossinger's in the evening, the parents would all dance the foxtrot, etc. But in the crew quarters, the kids were doing this down and dirty dancing that was called dirty dancing. And so this young girl, proper though she might be, wearing her matching sweater set and pearls, loved to dirty dance. And in real life, she did put herself through college by working at Arthur Murray's, and she maintained a lifelong love for partner dancing. And so this would be the genesis of the story of Dirty Dancing. I mean, it's a coming-of-age story. It's about a young girl losing her innocence. It's a story we've heard thousands of times before. Some of you may remember a great novel that Herman Wouk wrote called Marjorie Morningstar. And it was a novel about a young Jewish girl from an affluent family that would spend the summer in the Catskills. In that case, she was interested in theater, not dance. But that story's been out there really for a very long time. But what made this story so special, of course, was all of the ingredients that came together so magically in the making of that original movie. Okay, so let me make it very clear that Eleanor Bergstein did go off to college. She's a very intellectual, very liberal woman. She did not go off and marry the dance instructor, Johnny, even though she's plagued by people 50 years later saying, "What's your life like with Johnny now?" Didn't really happen. It's a story, of course. And so the end result is she's had a very distinguished career. She's written novels, she's written a couple of screenplays. But what led her to writing Dirty Dancing is a very interesting story. So she's in Hollywood at this time, an aspiring screenwriter. She gets a very big assignment. It's My Turn was the name of the movie that she wrote. It was from Michael Douglas early in his career. And she wrote an erotic dance sequence into the framework of the movie. Everybody loved it, and it seemed very appropriate to the telling of that tale. But the producers didn't like it, and so it was cut. And this upset Eleanor Bergstein so much that she decided, it triggered in her this memory of the summer of 1963. Keep in mind, that was probably America's last really innocent summer. We had John Fitzgerald Kennedy as our beloved president. We had Martin Luther King starting to make his speeches in the South. And the Beatles had not yet discovered America. And America had not yet discovered the Beatles. So it was the end of a very interesting era. And she remembered that time with tremendous fondness and decided that she was going to write a movie totally about erotic dancing that she would label Dirty Dancing. And so the first thing she did when she wrote the screenplay was to go back to her own personal record collection from the early 1960s. And she put together all of the songs she most loved that would tell the story of Baby's summer when Baby came of age, when Baby fell in love for the first time with the dance instructor, Johnny. And so she created this story, some of it based on fact. She changed the name of Grossinger's to another name to sort of protect the inn. And the end result was that it was a very romantic coming-of-age story. But it was so filtered through the eyes of the music, that the music would really dominate the whole telling of the story. It was like music being the wallpaper on the wall of a room that you stared at constantly. And it was that music that would be so evocative that would pull you into the story. So listen to that very carefully. The music is all very carefully chosen for the development as the story moves on. And right from the very beginning, when she was making this movie, she knew it was not going to be a traditional, old-fashioned Hollywood musical, in that there was no question that the leading players would not sing, they would dance their story. So there would be no, I mean, while there's provocative lyrics to the songs that were chosen, the lyrics are not sung by the performers. I mean, it's done like a jukebox movie where they take popular songs of the day with the real recordings and use those in the telling of the story. Okay, so there are several things I want you to know about the putting together of that movie that are very important. You know, when you go in to see the musical, it will say, the subtitle is The Classic Story on Stage. But I want to remind you, it's much more than the story. We've all heard that story. I mean, William Inge did it brilliantly in a play called Picnic, about a young girl making the wrong choice about an older man, etc. That story's been done thousands of times. What makes this so provocative was all of the ingredients of the movie, the visuals of the movie, the actors who played the role and brought Johnny to life and Baby to life, the visuals, the dance routines, all of this would make that so indelible. And most of all, of course, it was the music. Remember, when that album from the movie track came out, it ultimately sold 40 million records. It's one of the largest selling recordings ever. So it was certainly a period that we loved, and that compilation of music certainly came together and complemented itself in an extraordinary way. But there are other things about the making of this movie that I want you to be aware of that really strongly impacts what you see on stage tonight. Okay. Number one, keep in mind the budget was very low. It was $5 million to do this movie. Ultimately, it would make over $250 million. I want to remind you that when they released the DVD, it was the first DVD to sell 1 million copies. The last time I could trace the sale of the DVDs was 3 years ago, where they were still selling 40,000 copies a month worldwide. So extraordinary market for this. Okay, so here we are. This young girl is in charge of this movie. It's really her first major movie that is totally her idea, and she develops it from the first moment on. But she makes brilliant decisions along the way. Because there is a $5 million budget, you can't have a famous Hollywood director do this movie, and you can't have famous actors playing in it because you couldn't afford the salaries, etc. So she was very clever in all the choices she made, and I just want you to be aware of this for a little bit. First of all, she hired an unknown filmmaker, at least to commercial films. His name was Emile Ardolino, and Emile Ardolino had made a very strong reputation on television doing television videos. He did a PBS series in the 70s that I think was one of the great art series ever done. It was called Dance in America. And what he really did was sort of trace all the great choreographers, all the great dance companies. But what's really important about this, and what makes Emile so powerful as the director of this film, is number one, he's a choreographer himself, but number two, he's been filming dance for years and filming it in a very original way. What sort of drew him to the author's attention was in 1983, he won the Academy Award for Best Documentary, and it was a documentary about Jacques d'Amboise' the great dancer. And it was so charming, so visually delightful. It made dance so accessible to an audience. We think of dance as a live medium, and it's been years to develop how best to film dance. And so Emile was at the cutting edge of this, especially on television. So he was desperate to be given the opportunity of directing this film. So all of the sort of classic images that people who are devotees of this movie remember, you know, dancing in the crew quarters, the scene with Johnny and Babe when he tries to teach her lifts and they're in the lake, very sensuous scene. The scene where he's teaching her balance and they're walking on a log over the water. All these scenes that are so indelible were all the works of Emile Ardolino. And so they become so indelible, you'll see them all reproduced on the stage tonight. So his impact is very strong. Then she also hired a choreographer that was basically unknown at the time, and his name is Kenny Ortega. Kenny Ortega has gone on to be one of the most extraordinary choreographers in the world. But again, you know, here is this young writer who had the ability of spotting important talent. Kenny Ortega most recently has done for Disney the High School Musical 1, 2, and 3, and they've become the best-selling video musicals in the world. And again, they're up to their ears in wonderful and inventive dance, all the work of Kenny Ortega. But he would go on to do Newsies, you remember that film, but also he worked for Cher, he worked for all of the great artists, Michael Jackson. He literally created the last documentary about Michael Jackson's life called This Is It, and you know, it's a stunning piece, and he did all of the choreography for that also. So he's a major talent and works brilliantly. His choreography in the film, of course, is so memorable, again, that the great fans of the film literally remember every step in the movie and have memorized all of those dance sequences. And there are parties where people duplicate, Dirty Dancing parties where you go and duplicate all of the choreography. So she had this incredible team that she put together, and just before the movie opened, everyone involved in the movie hated it. And all of the agents said, her agent came to see it and said, you know, Eleanor, the best thing I can tell you is you should steal the original copy and burn it. That's the best thing you could do for your career. And then, of course, when it opened, the producers of the film said, well, we'll let it run one weekend in commercial theaters, we'll withdraw it, and then we'll release it as a video, and we'll never get our money back, but at least we'll get something back. Well, lo and behold, the first weekend, the reviews were very mixed. Some raves, some pans. Basically, it was sort of called the Jewish Camelot. It was very dismissive in what they said about it. And, you know, they couldn't give enough, Siskel and Ebert couldn't give enough thumbs down on the project. And so everyone was saying that it was going to be a disaster. What happened was that the audience, everyone forgot about the audience. And again, to show you how smart the producers were, they said, well, this is a movie only for young teens, so we'll try to find a way of getting to young teens to see this. Well, lo and behold, that's not who loved the movie at all. Everyone loved the movie. Young, old, rich, poor, people loved this movie. It became a cult movie almost overnight. And literally, it spread around the world. And so subsequently then it made all this money and literally surprised everyone. Everyone ended up being happy, and everyone ended up saying, I told you I knew it was really a good movie after I... But I do want to, for a moment, go back to the two stars of the movie. Jennifer Grey is the daughter of Joel Grey, the great actor from Cleveland. Her grandfather, Mickey Katz, was also from Cleveland, and he was a Borscht Circuit entertainer and would have performed at Grossinger's, actually. And so Jennifer comes from a long line of theatrical tradition and still has very strong Cleveland roots. In any case, she was really discovered in a movie the year before Dirty Dancing was done called Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And she was really wonderful in that film. And she had a little romantic liaison with the star of the movie. I'll get back to that in a moment. But in any case, she was then cast in Dirty Dancing. She was an extraordinary dancer, like her father, and the end result was she seemed to be perfect. They couldn't find a young man to play the lead. I want to pause for a moment and tell you this. When Eleanor Bergstein was researching this project, she was literally writing about her youth and the summer of 1963. But in the 80s, in the mid-80s, she did go back to the Catskills to see what had happened to all these resorts. And what had happened was, times had changed. Almost 20 years had passed. And so there weren't resorts anymore for families. Families didn't vacation in the same way they did in the early 60s. And so Grossinger's and the Concord and all those great old hotels and the hotels that they called the Bourse Circuit hotels, which catered to Jewish clientele from New York City, all of them just sort of faded and closed. And so while she was there, though, she did meet a young man who was a dance instructor, and he would be the basis for the character Johnny. He shared with her his diary. Now, I'm very sorry his diary was never printed. His name, incidentally, is Michael Terrace. There's nothing about him. I tried to look him up. No reference to him anywhere. But in any case, he shared with her the real story in that he didn't only really teach dancing. Now, I'm not going to go beyond that. I mean, you can sort of figure that out. But I mean, all these poor wives who are left all week while their husbands are off in the city, I mean, what's a girl to do? So in any case, he had a rather, hot diary. So she created Johnny based on this man. So when they wrote the movie script, they made Johnny this Italian young sort of stud in his early 20s, and they couldn't cast it. And so finally, they kept auditioning Patrick Swayze. And of course, Patrick Swayze had been trained at the Joffrey Ballet. He was a brilliant dancer. He was, one of the hunks of his day, but he was 30-some years old, and he certainly couldn't pass in any way, shape, or form as a young Italian boy. And so the end result was that they had to rewrite the script so that he's Irish, so that he's in his 30s. All of this makes it more poignant, incidentally. I mean, here is this young man who doesn't really, this is a sort of dead-end career. It's at a dead-end time. And, where do you go when you're 40 and nobody wants to pay to dance with you, let alone dance with you? So the end result was it made it very touching that he was cast. The only big problem was that he and Jennifer Grey had done a movie together 2 years earlier called Grey Dawn, and they hated one another. I mean, they literally had to keep them separated when they weren't on camera because it was salt and pepper. They couldn't connect at all. But when they did the test, the dance sequences as a screen test, it was so electric that they immediately hired him. And Jennifer was very distressed about this. But in any case, at one point in the middle of the filming was very difficult. They had 44 days to make this movie. The first 20 days, it was so hot, it was over 100 degrees, so people were fainting every day on the set from the exhaustion of this, very, very physical dancing in all this heat. And then the next 20 days, it was so cold that when they did that scene in the water with the lifts, they almost died of hypothermia. But in any case, by this point again, the two leads were disagreeing again and having trouble off camera. So very smartly, it was the author again, Eleanor, had them sit down and watch the original test takes where they saw the original dance sequences where there was this tremendous electricity and chemistry between them. And that helped them to finish the movie. A couple of other funny little footnotes for you. They were going to use Joel Grey as an elderly character in it, and he and his wife, those two characters, were kleptomaniacs. You'll see them in a minor subplot in the story tonight. And they were originally going to cast, wait till you hear this, Dr. Ruth in the role. Well, when Dr. Ruth read that, she was delighted to think she was going to be in a teen dance movie. She thought that was great. But when she read the script and realized she was going to be a kleptomaniac, she said, absolutely no way. And Joel Grey backed out of it also. So the film went on then and had this tremendous cult following. Okay, we now fast forward. So that is 1967. It plays all over the world. There are late night showings of it everywhere. There are fan groups that write to one another, that know every line of the story, that have followed everyone's lives. I do want to tell you one sort of touching thing about Jennifer Grey. Right after she made the movie, as soon as it wrapped, she went off to Ireland with the young man Matthew Broderick, that she had made the Ferris Bueller's Day Off with, and they were having a little relationship. And while they were in Ireland, he was driving very recklessly, and he drove over the line, and they were in a very, very serious car accident where a mother and daughter in the other car were killed. And so Jennifer Grey was devastated by this horrific, tragic accident, and went through this very difficult period of sort of survivor guilt, where she felt so guilty that she lived and those two innocent ladies died. Matthew Broderick actually was charged with reckless driving, and he was charged $150. That was the penalty for two people losing their lives. Tragic story. All right, so in any case, that sort of dampened the movie for her. One other final story about her. Many of you remember that she would come back and win Dancing with the Stars, the 11th season of Dancing with the Stars. She was the champion. But I want to tell you one other thing about Jennifer Grey's life that's very fascinating. Very early on, she had to have nose surgery. She had to have rhinoplasty done for a breathing disorder. And she said, I went into the surgery a star because, she was the #1 sought-after performer after Dirty Dancing opened. And after the surgery, they had so transformed her nose that even her best friends didn't recognize her. And she went through a very, very difficult period in her life. She went through a second surgery trying to restore the nose to what it looked like, and she was never able to do it. So she did have this wonderful big comeback, which I was so happy to see with Dancing with the Stars. Okay, one other thing I just want you to know about dancing. We think of this movie, these all came in a period of time. We had Saturday Night Fever, we had Fame, we had Footloose, we had Dirty Dancing, we had Flashdance. All of these movies came along. But I do want to remind you that the beginning of partner dancing really started in Irving Berlin's first musical in 1914. And a young couple named the Castles, Vernon and Irene Castle, danced the foxtrot on the stage, and everyone went wild all over the world. Keep in mind, this was still a period in 1914 where there were very specific rules, social behaviors, etc. It was sort of Downton Abbey back then, in terms of propriety. And the end result was suddenly America fell in love with this idea of partner dancing, of two people dancing very close together, very erotically, and very stylishly. And so they were really, the Castles were really the first great superstars of the early 20th century. They would travel all over America with dance shows, and they introduced in Paris, even before they appeared in the Irving Berlin work, they introduced Alexander's Ragtime Band to France, and everyone went mad for that kind of ragtime dancing. So they became the ultimate dance gurus, and all of our dancing can really go back to them. And they would set the fashion. When Irene had her hair, she called it bobbed. Everyone in America had their hair bobbed. They were the Kardashians of 1914, but they had something to show for it, So in any case, we can trace this partner dancing all the way back to them. And then we go to Fred and Ginger, and then we go to Gene Kelly dancing with Rita Hayworth, and then we go to John Travolta dancing with a large number of people, both in Saturday Night Fever and in Grease. And then it comes right up to Patrick Swayze and Jennifer Grey in Dirty Dancing. And now we're obsessed, of course, with all the dance shows that are on television. So that still plays a very important part of our life, and there is a very old history of partner dancing. Okay, so now about the musical. Okay, so in 2001, Eleanor Bergstein had seen a concert and found so much power in this live performance. It was a Bruce Springsteen concert, and she felt so much power in it that she thought, when I go to the movie theaters, I feel that same power in the audience when the audience watches Dirty Dancing. Maybe we can create that on the stage. So in 2001, they did a workshop in New York that lasted 8 weeks, where they tried to transform the movie into a live stage performance. But always, she's keeping the rule the principals are not going to sing like they do in traditional Broadway musicals. I want producers to think of this as a play with music. And so she couldn't quite get that together. She couldn't quite get producers to wrap their heads around that idea. And so the project sort of died in New York in 2001. The next time it turned up was in 2004 in Sydney, Australia, where she had worked with an Australian company to put together really an extraordinary production of Dirty Dancing. Now, I just want to tell you this. I was working on cruise ships in this period, and I would go to Sydney about 2 or 3 times a year, and you'd stay in the harbor for 3 days. So one night I would go to the opera at the famous Opera House. One night I would go to a dance concert there, and one night I would go to a theater. Kate Blanchett was just starting that brilliant resident theater that's gone on to become one of the greatest theater ensembles in the world. So that's how I would spend my 3 nights. And so I was there one time, and I had admired a young Australian choreographer named Kate Champion, who is the original choreographer for the stage version of the musical. And I saw that she was involved in choreography. There was a major piece about her in the Sydney paper. So I went based on this. I have to blush to tell you, I had never seen Dirty Dancing as a movie, and I had really sort of forgotten about the title of it. So I didn't even connect the movie with the stage version. I went because of this choreographer. And so I got in the theater, and I totally felt I was from Mars. I didn't understand. I mean, the audience screamed at everything. The first time Johnny appeared, I mean, girls are fainting in the lobby, I couldn't quite get all this together. And at the end, there is a very, very famous moment. It's one of the most quoted lines from a Hollywood movie, and I'm probably going to misquote it, so if you're a big fan, don't shoot me at this point. But I think the line is, "Nobody puts baby in the corner." I think that's the line, and Johnny says it. And it happens at the end of the show. And lo and behold, it happened, and the whole audience erupts for 5 minutes. You know, people are screaming and applauding, and yes, yes. And I thought, but she's not even really sitting in a corner. What are they doing? What are they talking about? So in any case, I was oblivious to it first time round. But I certainly felt the power of it and got pulled in by the dance of it. I saw it again in London. It opened in London actually in 2006 and played for 5 years at the Aldwych Theatre, where it was enormously successful. I want you to know, this is a good little fact that you can say at your next cocktail party. Say, do you realize that every third English person who dies plays the famous song from Dirty Dancing at their funeral, "The Time of My Life"? So I think knowing that is very important. So use it sometime. Okay, so the other really genius thing that the original writer did, she stayed with this show her entire life. She's still deeply devoted to the show and follows it very closely. But the other thing she did was to hire a director, a stage director named James Powell. Now, he's not the traditional Broadway director, choreographer. He is an actor, a singer who had appeared in Les Miserables in London, but Cameron Mackintosh admired him very much and used him to become what was called a resident director, which means in a big show like Les Mis, you have to have someone who keeps reproducing it, who keeps putting new people into it, who keeps putting together road companies of it. I mean, this is a very big business. And so James Powell has spent his career reproducing a work. So it was very smart to hire him to do Dirty Dancing, because what they really wanted to do was to have him reproduce the movie on the stage, which he was very successful in doing. So the show now started its tour late in 2014 in America. It's scheduled to tour through 2016. It's playing to capacity audiences everywhere. The fans are still there supporting this show. So if you haven't seen the movie, I don't want you to feel like you too are from Mars. Just get into Baby and Johnny as quickly as you can, and you will have a very good time. And the one final thing I want to remind you of is that you know, the dancing is very exciting, very energizing, but they don't encourage you to dance in the aisle. So just enjoy the show, and thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
At the time of my life, no, I never felt like this before. Yes, I